All right, so everybody will be able to watch the beginning if they're a little bit late. But I want to make sure we have enough time and that we don't run too late into the evening, because I know it's really amazing that you're all taking time out of your Wednesday evenings to be with us tonight. So thank you so much for coming to our webinar. The urgency is now, the need for clean trucks in New Jersey. As all of you very well know, air pollution is a really critical issue in New Jersey. This is especially true in our urban communities like Newark and Camden that see literally thousands of trucks driving to warehouses every day. I'm also sure that many of you know that in New Jersey, nearly half of our air pollution comes from the transportation sector, which is why it's critical for us to move forward quickly with clean truck policies. So I want to just quickly, I know that we have all been doing Zoom for a little while now, but just want to make sure we're all on the same page. We are going to be recording this webinar. If you wish to not be seen, feel free to turn your video off. We ask that you keep your microphone on mute throughout the presentation to help with background noise. So you'll see a microphone symbol located in the lower left of your screen as shown here. If that is crossed through, you're muted. And then next to that, you'll see a video camera symbol, and you're welcome to stay on or be off video at your choosing throughout the presentation. And then lastly, we invite you to put any questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring the chat, and we'll have some time. We'll have time at the end of each speaker for question and answers, and then we'll also have time at the end of the presentation for question and answers. So feel free to put those in as you think of them, or you can hold them to the end, whatever works for you. All right, so it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Kate Jackson Cruz. Kate is the Environmental Justice Coordinator at the Center for Environmental Transformation in Camden, New Jersey. CFET was founded in 2005, and since that time has become an agent for environmental justice in the Waterfront South neighborhood and works to empower and support residents as they engage in actions that address a host of environmental injustices. Kate is also a PhD candidate at Rutgers University Camden, studying community development, race, urban agriculture, and environmental justice. So without further ado, I will stop sharing my screen. I think. Maybe I do. Oh, no. Well, let me just, multiple participants can share simultaneously. Kate, are you able to share right now? Because I don't even see how I can stop sharing.
It should be at the bottom of the screen somewhere, near in the middle.
Okay, I see Kate's screen. Can you guys still see my screen? I don't know. Oh, here it is. Stop sharing. Figured it out. All right. Without further ado, Kate.
Hello, everyone. I am Kate Cruz with the Center for Environmental Transformation. It is so wonderful to be here and to be speaking on behalf of our residents in Camden, New Jersey. You heard a little bit about the center, so I will just add to that we are dedicated to environmental justice and to empowering our neighbors as they continue to fight all of the various environmental injustices that they face every single day. We aim to support our neighbors and to serve them however we possibly can. And it's important for us that we center their voices and their stories. So all of what you will hear tonight has been gathered through our community organizing and our work in the community from the various different campaigns and issues that we're working on. So, and you can see my screen okay? All right, so right now you should see a little overwhelming snapshot of our neighborhood, which is Waterfront South. And it's overwhelming because it is overwhelming. This is a list of all of the industries that have air permits in our neighborhood. So you can see that there are about 25 different air polluting industries in our less than 1 square mile neighborhood.
I'm seeing Megan's Gmail page.
Yeah.
I don't know what everyone else is seeing, but I'm seeing.
I think we're just seeing your full, I think we're seeing your
the full
email.
Yeah.
Yes, email.
Gotcha.
Probably want the other tab.
Let's see. I don't know why it's not giving me the option.
I think you have to open that screen first and then click share.
Open that screen first.
So,
Well, if you did open that
Okay,
screen,
there-
oh yeah,
there it is.
we can see it.
Now you see it? Do you see the overwhelming pages of data?
yes.
Okay, thank you. So this is a snapshot of our neighborhood, and this is the list of all of the different air polluting facilities and a little bit of our demographics here. So we have 37 different air toxins being released daily from a variety of different sources. We have in our less than 1 square mile neighborhood, we have the trash to steam incinerator, we have the county sewage treatment plant, we have EMR, which is a metal recycling, we have car crushing, we have a gypsum wallboard company, we have a number of polluting industries, including the port, which is a large source of truck traffic for us. So I think one recent study showed that there were about 8,000 trucks a year just going to the Broadway terminal, and as many as 77,000 truck trips to our local industries in our tiny little neighborhood each year. So we spend a lot of time dealing with the cumulative impacts of all of this, and we spend a lot of our days being very reactive to things like explosions and particulate matter that folks are seeing and don't know where it's coming from. We have explosions, we have fires, and we deal with a lot of permitting applications. So we spend a lot of our time doing that, but trucking always comes up. In every meeting that we have, no matter what the topic is, our residents are speaking about trucking. Trucks are constantly in our neighborhood, and trucks are a signal, they're a symbol of something much larger and systemic, but it's one of the most visceral, and it really points to the cumulative impact of environmental racism in our community. So our neighbors are exposed to particularly high levels of dioxin, lead, nickel, cadmium, arsenic in the air and also in the drinking water. So it's not surprising that the members of our community have higher rates of asthma and other respiratory diseases. Many, if not all of these companies that I listed on the prior slide, fail to take responsibility for the truck traffic that they contribute to. All of those industries have a lot of trucks coming in and trucks coming out. But when we go to advocate around their emissions, they tell us that we should stop focusing on their emissions and focus on the truck traffic, because it's actually the diesel pollution that we should be concerned about, which is kind of ironic because it's really all of it together. And that's why we needed the cumulative impacts bill so much. But industries are quick to blame the trucking, but they fail to see the role that they play in the trucking traffic patterns in our neighborhood, which is part of the larger issue. So one of our residents, Mike Morgan, is somebody who's very passionate about the neighborhood and also a student at Rutgers, and decided to use quarantine to do his own study of trucking in the neighborhood. He figured he was stuck in the house, he was sitting at his desk all day, he might as well look out the window and count the number of trucks coming in and out. So he lives on a main road, which is surrounded by industry, and he monitored how many trucks he saw over 54 days. He found about 26 trucks on average per day. And the big problem with that is that his street, there's a no trucking ordinance there. So trucks are actually not even allowed on that road. So you can imagine how many more trucks exist on the roads surrounding that. And this is why trucking is such a big issue for our residents. They're not even supposed to be on this street. And again, there's thousands of trucks coming in and out. So he actually used a monitor, and he was able to correlate higher averages of black carbon with that truck traffic. And those levels that he found were actually higher than the nearest DEP monitors were reflecting. So he uncovered some really important data here. And what he did with that was he was able to make some suggestions both to the no trucking ordinance, but also took it upon himself to gather other residents to call the industries whose trucks were coming in and out of the neighborhood. And he did track a slight decrease in truck traffic. However, he noticed that the pollution was just being redirected over a few streets to Atlantic Avenue, and was polluting folks over on that side of town. You can see here, this is the EJ screen tool, and our neighborhood is that little pink cross. And you can see that most of Camden's waterfront is at really high risk for particulate matter from diesel pollution. In fact, it's at the 89th percentile for both the state and the nation. So the risk is extremely high in our community. The cost of this is that, first of all, it's really costly to have trucks going in and out of a residential area. They cause a lot of damage to the streets. There's potholes, there are debris that fall out of the trucks and cause flat tires or damage to cars. There's noise pollution. I mentioned some of the explosions that folks report. Neighbors also report feeling their homes shaking, and they worry about their foundations of their homes. The noise pollution keeps people up. It wakes up children and babies and really makes people feel uneasy. But of course, one of the main reasons we're here tonight is to talk about the unsafe levels of air pollution that trucks cause in our neighborhoods. So for us in our neighborhood, with such a high density of trucks, we see a lot of asthma. We know that in our area, 1 in 3 children suffer from asthma, and that Camden City residents are 4 times more likely to be hospitalized for asthma than anywhere else in our county. And we have seen increased rates of death from COVID-19 by African Americans, and an increase in hospitalizations, which we know leads to lost days of work, lost days of school, and increasing health costs for folks. So these are all a variety of reasons that we're concerned about trucking in our neighborhood. We know that diesel exhaust is one of the main contributors of particulate matter in our neighborhood, and that we have some of the highest levels of particulate matter in the city, but also in the county. And this is linked to asthma. This is linked to heart disease. It's linked to heart attacks and stroke and premature birth and adverse pregnancy outcomes. Just so many unfair of consequences. And so we are advocating here with all of you for the Advanced Clean Trucks rule, because while this is such a complex issue, and we're also advocating things for like better enforcement, better street design, less industry overall, we also need to advocate for what we can do right now, which is get cleaner trucks on the road and decrease these harmful health impacts now. So this is part of our larger advocacy strategy, and we're thankful to work with all of you on this important issue.
Nice, thank you so much, Kate. I think Pat had a question in the chat about where you got the data from one of the first slides about your community.
Sure, one of the first slides, let me see.
I think the slide with all of the maps and things on it. Pat, is that correct?
Yes. That was probably from What's in My Backyard, and also the EJ screen, but I can get you that definitely.
Does anybody else have any questions for Kate right now? We can also collect questions. If she might have to hop off a little bit later, but I can collect questions for her and she can always answer those offline as well. So I think then I'm not even going to bother sharing my screen because then I'll probably not be able to figure out how to end it. But I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker this evening. First of all, thank you so much, Kate. That was amazing. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce our next speaker this evening is Melissa Miles. Melissa is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, which is a statewide organization dedicated to serving New Jersey's low-income and of-color communities overburdened by the impacts of pollution and climate change. She began her career in the field as a grassroots activist and community organizer while living in an environmental justice community in Newark, New Jersey. She holds an MA in anthropology from the New School, but maintains that her expertise in environmental justice is rooted in her lived experience and her commitment to making sure that people at the front line are the protagonists in the struggle for their future. Melissa is a member of the Environmental Justice Advisory Council to the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection, where she serves as co-chair of the Air Committee. She also serves on the steering committee for the Coalition for Healthy Ports, a regional collaboration of groups and individuals concerned with diesel emissions from the freight industry. So with that, I will turn it over to Melissa.
Thank you, Megan. I'm glad you read my bios. I'm like, oh yeah, I do that stuff. Another thing that NJEJA is involved in is the Moving Forward Network. And I'm going to present a few slides from a recent presentation we did with them for NESCOM about NJ-PACT rules. But first, good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. I don't know about you, but this is late for me. One good thing that the time change does is that it sends me to bed earlier. Thank you, Kate, for speaking so eloquently and thoroughly on the problem of trucks, and all of your data, because obviously, that is the problem in so many communities in New Jersey. But as Megan mentioned, I got my start in Newark in the Ironbound, where I was with Ironbound Community Corporation for almost 5 years before I came to New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, where I've been for a year. So still, a lot of my orientation around what happens on the ground comes from my time in Newark. Before I worked for Ironbound, I lived in the Ironbound for quite some time, off of a truck route. So, again, it was really just, my presence there that it, began to, I was trained by organizers. I did not study to do this work. It was sort of like jumping into it based on the necessity, to stand up in my community and for my family and for their health. So that said, I will try to share just a couple of slides. I don't want to repeat too much of what was said, because as I think Kate did a really great job. I'm sorry, 1 minute, yeah, sorry. Okay, so yeah, just some pictures that I've taken of trucks in the Ironbound. So, part of, we also have done truck counts, and part of the way that I became interested and involved in EJ work was by standing on the corner, one of the corners closest to my house at that time, counting trucks with my children in the stroller. So that was a great counting activity for, 1-year-old and 2-year-old. But, basically what it did was it helped us as community members to become more cognizant of, some of the things that become invisible over time, trucks, particularly freight trucks or drayage trucks, were one of the types of trucks that we paid close attention to, but also other sorts of trucks like waste trucks. So the truck that is on the right is a type of waste truck. It looks like it's probably a metal hauler. Being on the port meant that, we had exposures to lots of different industries, including metal crushing. Some of you have probably heard about the recent fire on the port at one of the metal facilities. But we think of recycling as this clean industry, but when you take into account the ways that these materials are carted, in very old diesel burning trucks, it doesn't seem nearly as clean anymore. And there's just some example of metal and the trucks. This is literally across the street from residential housing in the Ironbound. There is no buffer in certain parts of the Ironbound because of zoning, zoning, it's a whole other issue. We could talk about, just the race and economic implications of zoning throughout the state And you would see that, communities where we talk about environmental justice are often the communities that have zoning laws that are most detrimental to the populations. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so these are also my pictures of some of the paper recycling. Again, another thing, we think, okay, we're doing the right thing, we're putting it in the recycling bin, and it ends up somewhere. So imagine this when it floods. And of course, the mountains of containers that surround many port communities, particularly the ironbounds. And these are just some of the scenes that you can see, really not too far away from residential neighborhoods or homes. Okay, so, part of our organizing strategy is based on the environmental justice principles and the Jemez principles, which, really mean that people speak for themselves. And, we want to see meaningful participation of communities in the processes that, will change their lives, whether for good or for bad. People should be involved. And for too long, people have not been involved. Corporations have really run the show. So I was on a panel earlier and I was asked the question, like, who is your nemesis? We were asked, like, in this organizing and EJ work. And I said, well, I have to say my nemesis is corporate impunity, right? Because too often corporations get away with murder, basically. So back to the trucks, I'm going to share a few more slides with you all. Okay, so sorry, there have to be better ways to do this on Zoom. Okay, so as I think I mentioned, NJEJA is part of the Moving Forward Network, and we have been working together in coalition, frontline organizations and community organizations from around the country to push zero emission standards in our own regions and also nationwide. So we met recently with folks from NESCOM, we've been meeting with the EPA administrator. As you all know, we are waiting to hear who is our EPA administrator for Region 2. When they are appointed, we will be doing this work with them as well. So we, Dr. Sheats, who's on the call and will be speaking later, and I sit on a zero emission truck working group where we just have the good fortune to hear about what's happening in other states and also to have close contact and communication with folks from groups like NRDC. And I know we're going to hear from a colleague from NRDC in this call as well as Union of Concerned Scientists and other groups that, help to add capacity to our, the informational side of this work. So I talked a little bit about MFN and what we do. Again, our focus is zero emissions in the freight sector. So, we talk a lot about trucks and, the need for regulation in trucks and the ACT rules that's part of that. But, we just can't forget that the freight system, trucks is just one part of that. So what's interesting about the truck counts that we used to do is that, we would count these trucks on the corner. And what I recently learned through a study that NJEJA commissioned with NRDC and MJ Bradley is that on that same corner, most of the exposures were actually coming from the nearby rail yard. So we are also working, to help the EPA to start looking at rulemaking around rail, because it's been well over a decade and the technology, like the technology for trucks, exists now to bring us to zero or near zero emissions. So, for us, what's important to remember when we're talking about rulemaking around heavy duty trucks is that, rules like the PAC rule alone, they don't address equity and environmental justice, which is, I'm sure, something that Dr. Sheats will get more into. So we have to be intentional about, and remember that these are just first steps. We can't ever use all of our political capital, on these first steps. And we have to remember, while they need to be adopted, that, we need to take it farther. And so, in all rules, some of the things we want to always see is that their rules and requirements are enforceable, that they have timelines, that they have interim targets, that there are metrics, and that these goals are working to improve health outcomes. Like it's not just about the rule, like we need to see tangible results in health outcomes for the communities. There have to be penalties, right? People, what happens if they don't, abide by these rules? Like, there need to be penalties, and we need to see these penalties actually being equivalent to the cost of implementing the programs or mitigating the shortfall. We also need to see community participation. Luckily, our state and our DEP has really gotten the message when it comes to community participation. But community members really need to be involved at every level of the process. And again, for us, we talk a lot about people before profit. What is the reason for this? It's to address and prevent the health disparities that we see in our communities because of the diesel emissions. So I am going to pause there to allow my other colleagues to speak, but overall, this is the framework by which we are coming at these rules.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Yeah, that's really so important, and so I just don't have any words, but yeah, it is very important to make sure that we remember that these are first steps, and that we also make sure that all of these processes are centering around the communities that are directly impacted. Does anybody have any questions before I move on to our next speaker? And we'll also, like I said, have questions at the end too.
I have a question.
Sure.
Melissa said something about the pollution coming from the rail yards. Is the source of that pollution the trucks or the equipment at the rail yards, or the actual engines that they use?
The engines. Yeah,
So
concentration.
So the freight doesn't use any electric engines?
In the rail yards that serve the port, I can't say that they don't use any, but the modeling showed that not nearly enough to protect the communities. And the regulations just aren't there yet. So there in freight, some of these freight engines are like the glider engines of trains, right? So they can rebuild these engines, these old engines, and kind of act as if they're new without any penalties.
These engines are the ones that are moving the rail cars before they're pulled out, say, to go to Pittsburgh or wherever they're going to.
Mm-hmm.
Bill, maybe are the rails electrified in the rail yard there?
And I'll pop that study in the chat too.
I doubt it, Greg.
Okay, thank you.
Probably, with all of the cranes and things that they have to use to load the cars, they probably can't have overhead catenaries, but I'm just speculating.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I have one if
Okay.
I could.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. One of our members has a suggestion, which I have doubts about, but as long as we've got some experts on here that know what they're talking about, the individuals thinks that in the short term, perhaps hybrid electric diesel trucks for the long haulers, the ones that do several hundred miles, and then they could switch to electric when they come into overburdened communities. But I just thought, as long as have folks like yourselves here, that I should listen as to what your thoughts are about that. So I don't know whether that be Kate, Melissa, or
I'm sorry,
Nicky.
I didn't understand the question. Is it
Sure, yeah.
that the long haulers should switch to electric when they come into overburdened
Right, yeah,
community?
but I don't know if I have doubts whether Sierra Club should be supporting diesel trucks, period, let alone, I mean, their argument is that for those long haulers, when they're doing several hundred miles, the electric trucks right now for those really heavy trucks can't go that many miles. They can't go maybe more than 100 or 200 miles with electric, and that maybe if there was electric diesel, and then they could switch to electric when they come into overburdened communities or inner cities, that it might be a short-term solution. But I don't know who to ask or whether I should take that offline. So.
I mean, our colleague, I like to credit things where I hear them, but, Amy Goldsmith from Clean Water Action, from the time that I've known her, has been talking about last mile vehicles, electrification of last mile vehicles in communities, in urban communities. I mean, I can't answer your question directly. Maybe Kathy or Nikki can, but the need for electrification, particularly in those last mile communities, because our port, particularly the port of New York, New Jersey, it serves, this area. These goods are not going very far. So, solutions like that would, I think would improve the situation. Is it possible? I don't know.
Well, I think Melissa asked for Kate or Nikki, but I'll defer. Maybe I'll just be quiet at this point. I'm here to listen.
I mean, I think it sounds like a very interesting idea. I think, Rich, what you said though, and I haven't heard about that. I hadn't heard Amy talk about that, but I think what you said is insightful. I think the question may be, would we think that would somehow slow down the deployment of, trucks that are fully electric?
Exactly.
And
Yeah.
I just don't know. It's kind of the same question about, and Rich, I don't bring it up anymore because I've been shouted down about whether we should, depending on how long it will take to electrify trucks, whether in the interim, we should still put filters on some trucks that reduce PM, PM emissions by about, particulate matter emissions by about 90%. Well, would that be a good short gap solution until we do get the full electrification in a way that doesn't harm EJ communities, I want to say also. And I think people have been hesitant to advocate for that because they think it might slow down electrification.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Good question.
Yeah, that was a really good question. And it's also very interesting. I think Karen also had a question. Do you want to?
Yeah, and I'm reading it, it doesn't make sense. But I live in a more of a rural area. And what's happening off the highways, they're building warehouses where the farmers are selling off their land. So now you've got this tractor trailer traffic coming into rural communities and places where we don't even have stop signs on our street. So are you seeing an increase in tractor trailer traffic in urban areas, or is it more like the Amazons, the FedEx, and an increase in that? Is that what you're seeing more significant as far as the warehouse topic of this? Anybody?
I mean, the warehouses are really, a really big deal. I mean, on the way from the march today, we passed this massive Amazon hub, and I was still with ICC when we fought that project built on speculation, and it's just enormous. And, I remember the traffic study they did for it, and, we were just perplexed. That is one of the most congested areas of the Ironbound. You know, there's this really narrow passage. It's the only place I've ever gotten into a car accident, you know, with a truck coming down that street onto near Rome. I'm sorry, I'm really bad with street names, but yeah. So yeah, the warehouses are really where we are really paying a lot of attention and being very cautious and intentional. So yeah, I mean.
So I know the warehouses in general are, you know, it's an uphill battle with them. So I'm just wondering if we maybe take it backwards and work with the smaller delivery companies and see what we can do with them, with the FedEx, I mean, not small, but the FedEx and Amazon, and work backwards as far as local delivery and getting them on a more aggressive plan to EVs. I don't know if we've worked with them or talked with those companies to try to change some things. Just a thought.
I think as Melissa said, we're really, I haven't heard that solution discussed, Karen, but as Melissa said, you know, we're really worried about that, about the warehousing. I mean, I would ask, you say they come in rural areas.
Mm-hmm.
Are they being sited in rural EJ communities? Do you know?
No, usually not.
So,
Yeah.
because one of the things we're worried about is that there has been some advocacy that says keep the warehousing close to the source and, you know, not, I think what they call warehouse sprawl, not going suburban and rural areas. And of course, the translation of that to us is put it in EJ communities.
It's happening all over. It's happening all over. And I mean, people are, especially I think the past year and a half with the pandemic, people are ordering online and not going into the stores, and they're using, you know, their credit cards and getting Amazon points or whatever, however you do it. And I think that industry is really growing right underneath our feet.
Therein lies the danger.
Mm-hmm.
And if you know, if we do as we have done so far, you know, they will be disproportionate EJ communities, and we don't think that's a good solution. And so, you know, we have to all think of a solution together, but don't have a knee-jerk reaction and say, well, let's keep it close to the source. And, you know, then it turns out being even worse for EJ communities.
But Karen, one of the things you have to realize, or I'm sure you do, is that these trucks probably have their origin in Newark or Camden. You know, they're coming from the ports.
Yes.
You know, they're driving out to where you are to unload in the warehouse. And then, of course, you have local trucks coming from the warehouse out to all of the suburban and other communities. Mm-hmm. So it's all interrelated.
Absolutely. And I didn't mean to take anything away from the EJ communities at all. I'm just saying they've impacted every community, and the EJ community even worse. Or more so. So thank you.
Thank you, Karen.
And there's more warehouses to come, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was going to point out as more super tankers are being constructed, I saw an estimate, this was back in 2018, that when they were debating whether to raise the bridge, but when they raised the bridge, and that allows these super tankers to come in, and the estimates were something like 8 or 9 times the traffic, truck traffic, heavy duty traffic. You know, the last mile, I think Amazon and FedEx are doing the right thing. Their last mile, which is the going to the warehouse to the point of delivery, they're maximizing the use of electric vehicles, but they're the large vans and stuff that you see running around. But they're not the big polluting trucks, the diesel that they're replacing. They're replacing the gas guzzlers.
And I think that Tamar, I hope that I pronounced your name right, has their hand up. And then I think we should also gently move on to the next speaker so we have time for everyone. But Tamar, if you want to go ahead.
Thanks. Yes, I, as an educator, wanted to ask, is anyone aware of the climate change standards that are now part of the K through 12 curriculum that was just recently passed? And the reason I'm saying that is because with the talk about, and I'm actually putting this in the chat, the link, and the reason why is because there's the need for education and teaching our students about all that we're talking about. And now that it is part of the education process, as part of the curriculum, we're the first state in the nation to pass climate change 2020 New Jersey student learning standards. We're #1 public schools in the nation and all that great stuff. This is the type of information that has to be also part of the classroom instruction. So has anyone thought about that yet? Because the standards are brand new. So I just put the link in the chat. That's something definitely to also have an alternate way. I know that we have folks on that are getting their doctorates or what have you in Rutgers. This is huge. And everything that we're talking about advocacy, we're talking about community involvement. Then you start getting schools involved, you're talking educators, you're talking about where schools are placed, where they're built. Students, you're talking then, NJEA, who has resources to offer that professional development for teachers. You're talking about, helping to continue that type of professional development, even with teachers and different things like that. You're looking at really being able to get out the educational part of what you're talking about, drawing out your audience and being more of an impact. So I just wanted to put that out there.
Just real quick, because I know we have to move on. Renee Pollard, for those who don't know me, the Chair for Environmental and Social Justice. I agree with you, Tamara. I am also on the Board of Education in my town. And I do know that it's part of the curriculum, and I agree. That's another avenue that you can educate folks in the classroom through instruction. Yes, we have standards, and then I look at them as ever evolving. Because they always come up with new ones and expect you to do, wonders in the classroom. But far as reaching another arm, tentacles to educate folks, that's another way to go.
So
Yeah,
let me say
definitely.
quickly that about 9 months after Sandy, New Jersey Easy Alliance held what we called our Sandy Climate Justice Roundtable. And we invited people from EJ communities and groups that work with them to attend the roundtable. And we talked about what happened to these communities during Sandy, because we didn't think there had been enough discussion in New Jersey about what happened to low-income communities and communities of color. And we came up, we have a 30-page report, and I'm happy to send you all, but we had a lot of recommendations, and then we prioritized recommendations, and we came up with 3 prioritized recommendations. And one of them was that environmental justice and climate justice should be taught in the schools in New Jersey. And we have had EJ leadership programs since then. And most recently, though, we are still trying to implement that, that recommendation. And so we have actually talked to the Department of Education before they put out these standards, and have been engaged in that discussion with them. One of our main problems is just a capacity issue for us to be able to develop or help develop that curriculum, but we are still intent on finding ways to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that this has been a really good and important, we're bringing up a lot of important topics and things to discuss. This has been really constructive. But just in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to our next speaker. Next, we're going to hear from Kathy Harris from NRDC. Kathy is the Clean Vehicles and Fuels Advocate from NRDC's Climate and Clean Energy Program. She works to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, which is the largest source of emissions in the United States. Covering the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic regions, she advocates for policies that accelerate the electrification of light, medium, and heavy-duty vehicles that are powered by clean, renewable energy. Prior to joining NRDC, she worked for the state of Delaware as a planner, addressing a variety of statewide and regional policies and programs to mitigate greenhouse gases in the transportation sector. She also served as the Delaware Clean Cities Coordinator. Harris holds a bachelor's degree in environmental science and a master's degree in marine policy from the University of Delaware. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Cassie.
Thanks so much, Megan. And thanks everyone for the really engaging conversation so far. This has been really, really awesome. So can everyone see the slides? Let me see if I can do the slideshow view so people can see it better. Just to confirm, thumbs up if you can see it. Excellent. Okay, good. So thank you again for the introduction, Megan. So based on the conversations we had so far too, I'm excited to talk about one potential first step that Melissa really set up well, that New Jersey is considering right now to help reduce emissions from the transportation sector, specifically from the trucks and buses in the states. As Melissa highlighted though, this is really just the very first step, and that we need to work towards doing some more targeted emissions reduction policies in environmental justice communities. But this is a first step that's on the table right now in New Jersey, and hopefully something that the Department of Environmental Protection will move forward with by the end of the year, which is the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. There we go. So to kind of set the stage, which I know Megan has talked about and we've heard throughout today's webinar so far, is the topic of medium and heavy duty vehicle pollution. And so as many of you are probably aware, transportation accounts for 41% of greenhouse gas emissions in the state. And of that, I didn't have a specific number for, the medium and heavy duty vehicles though, for that, while it's a relatively small percentage of the vehicles that are on the road, they account for about 20% of all transportation emission, which is around what we're seeing nationally as well, which is the figure here on the right, which shows that, medium and heavy duty vehicles nationally is 24% of the vehicles of greenhouse gas emissions. And so while the vehicles on the road are a relatively small percentage, they account for 44% of the NOx pollution from the transportation sector, as well as 39% of particulate matter from the transportation sector as well. So small amount of vehicles, but are doing a lot of damage to our air quality and to our health. And so before I dove too deeply into the rules, I wanted to kind of set the stage as to what exactly we mean when we talk about medium and heavy duty vehicles. And as you can see, this is a chart of all of the different vehicle classes that are covered in the medium and heavy duty vehicle bucket. By classes, I mean the weight of the vehicle. So that's how the United States government defines a different class of a vehicle. So we're talking about classes 2B through 8, which weighs anywhere from 8,501 pounds to over 33,000 pounds. And as you can see from this graphic, this covers everything from crew-sized pickup trucks to dump trucks to school buses to the Amazon delivery vehicles that we were talking about as well. So it covers a pretty large gambit of vehicles that are spewing all of these emissions throughout the state. And just to kind of put a finer point on it as to the current number of vehicles that we see in New Jersey, there are about 422,000 of medium and heavy duty vehicles. As you can see, the majority of those are found in this kind of class 2, which is the pickup trucks and vans, and then also in the single unit work and freight truck as well. So I think some of these pictures you'll see look very familiar with what Melissa had shown us, some of the vehicles that are driving through the communities and are doing that kind of last mile delivery that we were chatting about as well. But the good part is that the majority of the vehicles in class 2B are ripe for electrification, and it's something that we can work towards very, very quickly to help to support the electrification of those vehicles. And one way we can do that is through this policy called the Advanced Clean Truck Rule. So what the Advanced Clean Truck Rule is, it's a rule that started in California that New Jersey is eligible to adopt under the Clean Air Act, but it requires an increasing percentage of new trucks purchased in the state to be zero emission vehicles beginning in the model year 2025. And the percentages of new vehicles that must be ZEV vary by vehicle type, but for all of the vehicle types that require ZEV percentages increase each model year. So we're increasing stringency as the years go on. And to clarify, this is a an electric vehicle mandate on the manufacturer. It's not specifically on any fleets at this point. But there's also this large entity reporting requirement that's included in the rule as well, which will help the state to get additional information on the current vehicles that are on their roads and where those vehicles are traveling. And so that information will help to set the stage for future policies and to reduce, to help to support the additional electrification of those vehicles too. And to put a finer point on what I mean by this increasing stringency. So as you can see, if New Jersey, they're on track right now to adopt the rule by the end of the year. If they do, that means that they'll start the implementation of this regulation in model year 2025, which really equates to calendar year 2024. And so what this will do, as you can see, for the different classes of vehicles, we have classes 2 through B, classes 4 through 8, and then tractors. And you can see that the different percentages increases in both column, in all of the columns, but there's at different rates for each of the specific vehicle types. And you'll see that there's also the section on early crediting. States outside of California, such as New Jersey, have proposed this early crediting, which would allow for EV trucks purchased in the years prior to the rule implementation to count towards the sales requirements in model year 2025. Now, another rule that, as I mentioned, medium and heavy duty vehicles have 44% of NOx emissions from the transportation sector. And so this is a rule that's not yet proposed in New Jersey, but is in California right now. And we consider it a complementary rule that the state should adopt as well to help reduce emissions from the transportation sector. So as I said, this is a complement to the advanced clean truck rule, and it's a near-term emissions reduction from new diesel trucks. So this rule requires that an additional 75% reduction in nitrogen oxide emissions from engines in new gasoline and diesel trucks sold between model year 2025 and 2026, and a 90% reduction for trucks sold in the beginning of model year 2027. So this helps to better align with actual operations and global standards of these vehicles and to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. As you can see in this chart from on the right, implementation of this rule will really help to drastically reduce those emissions by model year 2027. And so what are the benefits of the advanced clean truck rule and heavy duty omnibus rules? This is a chart from a recent study that was completed by MJ Bradley Associates on the advanced clean truck and heavy duty omnibus rules. And as you can see, with the two rules together working in tandem, they can provide substantial societal benefits to New Jersey. And over $1 billion is expected in benefits by 2050, which includes air quality, climate, utility, and fleet total cost of ownership benefits as well. And so because of this, we're hoping that New Jersey moves forward with the ACT this year. If they don't move forward this year, they'll miss that first year of potential model year compliance, which means that additional new diesel and gas vehicles will be on the roads. And so we're really hoping that the state moves forward with that rule as soon as possible, and then also moves forward with rules such as the heavy duty omnibus rule to help to maximize these benefits in New Jersey. And as I said in the beginning of my presentation, and as Melissa highlighted, we see ACT as a foundational policy, but really do see New Jersey, it's important and vital that New Jersey also adopt additional measures designed specifically to ensure reductions in air pollution from transportation in community of colors and low-income communities as well. And so with that, this is my contact information as well, but happy to take any questions, and then can also turn over to Nicky.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I think it was really helpful to have like the visualization of how each rule will affect like New Jersey. I'm not speaking very eloquently tonight, but that's because I have a cold, I promise. Does anybody have any questions for Kathy before we move on? Bill, I think you have a question.
Yeah, Kathy, the heavy omnibus rule, what year did you say the 75% reduction would take effect and the 90%?
So the 75 would be 2024, and the 90% would be 2027.
And is this really what Rich was asking about before, like interim pollution controls before we go to zero emission? Is that essentially the goal here?
Yeah, for the vehicles that aren't able to electrify, I mean, obviously the ultimate goal is pure electrification, but in the interim, for those new vehicles that are being produced, the NOx emissions would ensure that at least the NOx reductions are included in those new vehicles.
So this applies to current sales of diesel and gas fired powered trucks.
Yes.
Okay.
And then John actually did have a question in the chat. He said, what is the average life of these truck classes on the roads and how do we accelerate end of life?
That is a very, very good question. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. I think each different fleet will vary depending on their lifespan. I know like school districts have very specific timeframes for their turnover. But you know, I think there are some vehicles on the roads that will last for 20 years. Depending on the individual fleet. So that's why, you know, I think it's pretty imperative that we get the rule done as soon as possible by the end of this year to ensure that we're not having potentially hundreds or thousands of new vehicles coming online in those subsequent model years that could be on the roads for decades to come without the mandates.
I just have a comment. The problem with the implementation of these with new car sales or new truck sales is those truck drivers, particularly the ones that own their trucks, would probably spend a lot of money to repair it to extend their life and extend the pollution aspect. So a lot of states have been adopting the buyback rule, which basically takes old trucks and they just buy them, give them some money as long as they are buying something that's new to meet, hopefully the electronic or the alternate fuel vehicle.
Yeah, and I can also put this in the chat, and I think Megan will share it around afterwards. But the MJ Bradley study that I mentioned also looks at potential total cost of ownership for fleets to talk about the benefits to fleets, while the upfront costs right now, which hopefully there'll be additional programs and incentives to help reduce that upfront cost for fleets, but within the next decade, I'm blanking on the exact number right now because I don't have it in front of me, but the total cost of ownership for an electric version of these medium and heavy duty vehicles is expected to surpass or to be in the positive over diesel and gas vehicles too.
And then I think Mimi also had a question in the chat. One of her concerns with electrification is that our electric supply is not yet clean energy. So doesn't clean electric supply need to be pushed in tandem with EVs? Yes,
Absolutely. So I work specifically on transportation, but I know my colleagues are also working on renewable energy and other aspects in New Jersey, including, you know, some of the wind programs that have been announced recently to help to ensure that we're getting clean energy onto the grid, and also utilizing other, you know, thinking about other strategies as well on you know, storage of solar energy and all that kind of stuff too, to ensure that we're maximizing the amount of clean energy that's being utilized for these vehicles.
And then Brian asked, are you optimistic that the ACT will be passed soon, and what can New Jerseyans do to ensure that? And Brian, I'm really glad you asked, because that was the next thing I was going to say. I was going to put a quick plug for our action alert that I'm also going to send around afterwards. I'll probably send around an email tomorrow morning. It'll include like all the relevant links, also this action alert, but I'll also put it in the chat right now. So the governor and DEP need to basically approve the ACT Act by November 24th in order to get it in the register in New Jersey in December, which will then mean that it can be implemented next year, which then means that, or it'll be adopted next year, which then means it'll be implemented for model year 2025. Is that correct, Kathy? Did I get those numbers right? So basically, if they miss the November 24th deadline, then we get pushed back a model year. So the link that I dropped in the chat and that I will send around tomorrow morning is just a quick action alert. You can click through and send a letter to Governor Murphy and DEP Commissioner Sean Latourette to urge them to move forward with this. We hear that they are going to do it, but we won't believe that until they do it. So any extra noise will be definitely helpful. So that was a perfect segue. Thank you, Brian. And then I am going to move on to make sure we have enough time for our last speaker. Our final speaker this evening hardly needs an introduction. Dr. Nicky Sheats is the director of the Center for the Urban Environment of the John S. Watson Institute for Public Policy at Kean University, and has defined the primary mission of the center as providing support for the environmental justice community. The issues he works on include air pollution, climate change, cumulative impacts, developing EJ legal strategies, and increasing the working capacity of the EJ community. Sheats was a founding member of the New Jersey Environmental Justice Alliance, EJ Leadership Forum, EJ and Science Initiative, and an informal NEEJ attorneys group. He has been appointed to the New Jersey Clean Air Council, EPA's Clean Air Act Advisory Committee, and National EJ Advisory Council, and was a co-author of the Human Health chapter of the 2014 National Climate Assessment. Early in his career, Sheats practiced law as a public interest attorney. He holds a BA from Princeton University and earned a PhD in Earth and Planetary Sciences, JD and MPP from Harvard University. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Sheats.
Thanks, Megan. Hi, everybody. And let me start by admitting that, and I do this often, I messed up today. I was rushing out to go to the march, and I picked up the wrong charger from my computer. So I have some slides for you all tonight, but they are on my computer, which no longer has a charge on it. So I will talk you through them. You know, sometimes I feel like if there's a way to make a mistake, I will find it and make that mistake. So my assignment tonight has been to put the ACT rule in the EJ perspective in a larger perspective, and also to talk about, you know, some issues we're talking about, we're looking at with respect to the ACT rule. And so that larger climate change mitigation policy perspective is important to us. And you may know that the EJ community has kind of uniquely, although other people a lot of times are picking up on it now, but when we first started this, talking about this some 13 to 14 years ago, we were pretty much in it alone. We say that climate change mitigation policy should not only be used to fight climate change, but also to reduce the dangerous greenhouse gas co-pollutants, right? You fight climate change by reducing greenhouse gases, but there are other co-pollutants emitted along with those greenhouse gases like particulate matter and sulfur dioxide and NOx that are hurting communities near those plants now, and are part of the disproportionate pollution burden that environmental justice communities, communities of color, and low-income communities often face. And so we've been advocating for that for a while now, since 2007, generally in the power producing sector. And we've come up with a policy we call mandatory emission reductions that says if a power plant is located in an environmental justice community, it has to reduce its emissions. And from our perspective, one of the problems now is that the primary climate change mitigation policy that our country and our state is using is carbon trading. You know, we're part of the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, New Jersey is. And from an EJ perspective, under carbon trading does not guarantee emissions reductions in EJ communities. You might get them, you might not. And for us, that's not good enough. So we have opposed carbon trading. We've opposed New Jersey entering into RGGI. We developed a mandatory emission reduction policy that can be applied under any kind of climate change mitigation policy, whether it's a carbon trading scheme, whether it's a carbon tax. We also don't like carbon taxes because carbon tax also does not guarantee emissions reductions in EJ communities, or whether it's a regulatory scheme. In the transportation sector, we have not come up with a similar policy yet that corresponds to our mandatory emission reduction policy in the power sector, and we're still working on that. We have opposed TCI, the Transportation and Climate Initiative, because at its core, it is a carbon trading system. And again, that won't guarantee emissions reduction in EJ communities. So what we are advocating is that we develop rules that in the transportation sector that will not only reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector, but will guarantee reductions of greenhouse gas co-pollutants related to the transportation sector. And that's where we are now. So we have supported the ACT rule, but as both Melissa and Megan and Kathy have said, we don't think the ACT rule will work alone because there's no EJ language in the ACT rule, right? The ACT rule is not an EJ rule. So it doesn't guarantee reductions in EJ communities. You probably will get some, almost certainly. But just like under carbon trading, the question is, how many EJ communities will receive reductions, which ones will receive the reductions, and what will be the extent of those reductions? So for us, it's of utmost importance that we pair the ACT rules with EJ specific rules that would guarantee transportation emissions reductions in EJ communities. And we are working on that and coming up with ideas that we hope will work. There's several other things I want to say about market-based mechanisms. Kathy mentioned that the ACT rule should be paired with clean energy rules or clean energy strategies with power plants. What we would say is that the ACT rule should be paired with mandatory emissions reductions in power plants located in EJ communities. And there is a danger, and MJ Bradley report to focus on Newark talks about that you will just shift that under electrification, particularly for buses and cars, and we're talking about, buses are part of the heavy duty, medium heavy duty, that you could, under certain circumstances, you could simply shift emissions of some pollutants like PM from the buses to the power plants, and actually you would get more PM reduction if you, instead of electrifying buses, you use new traditional buses. Because the emissions rate of PM from some power plants for PM is higher than the emissions rates of new traditional buses. Now, a whole lot of things have to align for that to happen. But what we're saying is we can't just say electrify everything and not specifically, especially for EJ communities, be very careful and do our homework and make sure there's not a better solution than electrifying, at least in EJ communities. Or let's make sure we pair the electrification with mandatory emissions reductions of power plants in EJ communities. So that's the first point, right? That's putting the ACT rule for us and transportation rules in the context of larger climate change mitigation policy. And we're looking for those mandatory emission reduction policies for transportation in the transportation sector, do the same thinking we've done in the power sector. Let me go back to the theme, and again, Melissa and Kathy both talked about it, is that the ACT rules alone, from an EJ perspective, this may not do the job, because you are gradually producing zero emission trucks through the ACT rule, and so where would those trucks be used? The rule doesn't say anything about that. So how do we make sure the zero emissions trucks are going to be used in EJ communities? And one thing we're saying is, please be very careful. Please, in your advocacy, and right now we're supporting the ACT rule. I'm gonna talk more about that in a minute. Please don't classify or characterize the ACT rules as an EJ rule or justify them primarily on environmental justice. Because what we're afraid of is that if that is done, when we come back with the EJ specific rules, the government will say, but wait a minute, you said the ACT rule was an EJ rule. Now you're coming back to us again? We thought that was solving your EJ problem. That's what you were telling us. So we don't want to get into that situation, right? We want to develop EJ specific rules to go along with the ACT rules as quickly as we can And we want to pass, pass the act rules, but those EJ specific rules also. We are somewhat worried that under the act rule, and here's another mistake I made. At least I fess up to my mistakes, usually anyway, have to. Aaron Rodgers doesn't fess up to his mistakes. That's a whole other topic. In the act rule, there is a credit system. And, I'm supposed to kind of be the watchdog in our organization for this. And I had a brain freeze on this one because I knew there was a credit system. And I brought it up, but I didn't sound the alarm because my intuition told me that the credit system in the act rule, and you can trade these credits within the act rule, was not the same as the kind of trading system the EJ community has opposed. And I got kind of a shock though when I was on the panel with a private lawyer and he described the act rule as a cap and trade rule. I was like, oh Lord, have we missed something? Have we missed something here? So we are taking along with the help of our environmental colleagues at NRDC, people like Kathy and UCS. We are in the process of taking a hard look at the trading credit part of the act rules to make sure that it's not something that we have a problem with and can act in a way to either prevent or make emissions reductions in EJ communities more difficult under the rule. Our preliminary look at it doesn't seem like it will, but we're going to do the work that we didn't do before and be very careful here and make sure that it is something we can live with and be able to articulate the difference between the credit trading in the act rule and the kind of credit trading that we don't like. And for the NOx rule, I think there's credit trading in the NOx rule. For full disclosure, I haven't read the NOx rule. We survive day by day, but I have to say, and this is a difference from an EJ perspective and an environmental perspective. We had not been tipped off that there was credit trading in the act rule to an EJ person read it until I read it. And then we were like, oh, okay, because, our perspectives are different. And so we're going to do the same thing for the NOx rule and try to be very careful. Although I have to admit that I was really, when Kathy said that the NOx rule is going to deliver 75% to 90% reductions pretty soon, that sounds pretty good, right? But still, I think we have to be careful, do our homework up front about, is there a credit trading system in the NOx rule? And if so, we need to understand exactly how that works before we give, an endorsement for that rule. So I'm gonna stop there. Again, just trying to put the transportation rules like the act rules and the NOx rules in the larger perspective that we have been dealing with for many years now in the EJ community, and we want to make sure it's consistent, right, with the values and the policies that we've been working on in other sectors of climate change policy. But we definitely are down with the fact that we got to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. But again, let's do it in a way that guarantees benefits to EJ communities and doesn't just assume them. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Sorry, I didn't have the PowerPoints, a few slides, which may have made what I said a little bit easier to understand.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sheats. I think that you pointed out so many really critical things for us to keep in mind and to really put the act rule and all of the other policies into perspective. And I think John started us out in the chat with a question or a thought. He said, parallel to ACT, can a transport pollutants congestion tax be applied to motivate reduced use of diesels in EJ communities? At points of concentration, it is pretty easy now for traffic to be monitored by cameras and bills to be sent. Vehicles of older age and less acceptable technology could be taxed at appropriate higher rates.
Well, look, we would favor a regulation as opposed to a tax. We would favor just a rule that says you can't do it. And if you're and this is, this is a larger discussion again between a carbon tax and market-based mechanisms. Look, if you're going to change behavior, we think the best way to do it is to outlaw it. For example, we don't tax murder. Now that's an extreme example, right? But we don't say we're going to tax murder. We say, hey, you can't do it. And since we really are we're in two crises. We're in a climate change crisis, but the EJ communities are also in a pollution crisis and health crisis. We think we have to get this done as quickly as possible and with the most reliable ways. And we think rules would probably be the most reliable ways. Now, if you're going to tell me that sounds great, Sheats, but we don't have the political power to get the rules. So would a tax be better than nothing? I don't know. Let's talk. I think that's when we have to, talk to our EJ colleagues and see what we think. But I recognize that that's an issue, that.
I think Rich has a question.
Yeah, Nikki, I would think that perhaps taxes would be regressive to a certain extent in some cases.
And that's that's a good point, Rich. And I must admit that's another shortcoming, because we generally talk about the emissions reduction aspect of it as EJ folks, because we really talk about public health a lot. But one place where we did bring in the tax argument is with TCI, the Transportation and Climate Initiative.
Exactly.
And we said, look, not only will it not guarantee emissions reductions in EJ communities, but just like you said, it seems to us that there's a good chance it's going to act like a regressive tax.
Yeah, and Sierra Club changes policy accordingly.
Great, I didn't even know that.
With your help, right?
I guess I did know that. I guess the National Sierra Club, because we actually talked with them in the Equitable and Just National Climate Platform. We actually talked to Mike Brune about this, and I do remember now that they changed their policy, as did NRDC, by the way, as did Earth Justice. Earth Justice came out against TCI too.
So thank you, by the way.
I think Renee has a question.
Just real quick. Thank you, Dr. Sheats, for that thorough explanation. Since it seems like there's quite a few hanging chads to the ACT, how can we make sure that we're not, that we're collaboration or in our advocacy and our policy making and all those things? How can we be sure that we're not missing the mark when it comes to, maybe more collaboration, or, what can we do moving forward to make sure that we're on track?
Well, what we have asked, and people were I don't want to say kind of people, environmental groups, I think have taken a new look at these things and are trying to work with us. What we've asked on both a state level and national level is to let EJ groups lead on EJ. That the environmental groups should not step out and start making policy on EJ by themselves, but either in collaboration with EJ groups or support the policies that the EJ groups have, already developed. And we know that can be tricky. And we know to some extent we're putting environmental groups in a tricky, in an awkward position, because first we say you got to pay attention to EJ, and then we say, but don't go out there making rules on your own. So you got to kind of hit that sweet spot. But I think it is let EJ groups lead, and we know that can be, it's not always easy, but we think that's the best way to do it, because keep in mind that if an NRDC or Sierra Club or UCS starts making EJ policy, like with TCI, well, we won't hash. Once a powerful environmental group starts making EJ standards, that becomes EJ standard. right? The environmental group then becomes the EJ group, because environmental groups have more name recognition than we do, more resources, more people, and quite frankly, are whiter. And I still think the white people listen to more than people of color. And once the environmental groups come out with equity standards, then those are likely to be the equity standards, and the EJ groups will be marginalized in our own space.
Okay, thank you. And I'm hoping they'll follow that. This new facelift that the New Jersey chapter has, letting the EJ groups lead. We're trying to improve and moving forward. We're listening to you guys more, and we're hoping that moving forward, we can work together and in collaboration and, get some work done. So thank you.
Contact Melissa.
I also had a really quick question just about when you were talking about how the ACT rule isn't an EJ rule, and we really need to have these EJ policies that kind of go along with it, and make sure that we're covering, make sure that we're targeting reductions in overburdened communities. Are you working on policies like that? Are those policies in the works? Is there anything that people can do to help support that, or down the road support that work?
We're not, just to be honest with you, and this is just my opinion, I think we need to work on it more, but it's just, we're doing so many things, it's difficult. But, but we did say in comments, we submitted comments to the BPU on charging. They talked about charging infrastructure and how they were going to put, how do you incentivize placing charging in infrastructure in EJ communities that will then incentivize using zero emission trucks in EJ communities, or zero emission medium and heavy duty vehicles. And our comments, we said, well, the first thing is you should say that only zero emission vehicles can be used in EJ communities. Right? Let's start with that. Make that a requirement, make that a rule. And then we went on in the comments to say, but if you're not going to do that, then then we suggested other things. So we are, we are making those type of suggestions already. Yeah. And in the ACT rule, we similarly said that when we submitted comments on that, even though we said we support the ACT rule, we said there needs to be, just what we've all said here, that we need to develop companion rules and regulations that are EJ specific to go along with the ACT rule. That the ACT rule is not, in and of itself enough. And we actually cited a resolution from California. I think it was, CARB, I get it mixed up, that said that the use of zero emission trucks, they passed it along with the ACT rule, because the resolution has no, not the power of law, that says that zero emission trucks the use of them should be prioritized in EJ communities, or something to that effect. Although they haven't developed a rule like that yet either. California hasn't. I think we should beat them to the punch, you all.
That would be great. That would definitely be.
And they can adopt our rule instead of us adopting their rule.
Exactly. Finally, turn it around on them.
Yeah.
Does anybody else have any questions for Dr. Sheats? I know we're kind of getting close to 8:30, and everyone is probably very tired. Daylight savings time just happened. And I will say, if anybody has other questions that come up later, let me know, and I can definitely, we can get those answered offline. But I do want to thank all of our speakers so much. This is such an important issue. We haven't been talking about it enough. We're finally talking about it. But the ACT rule is just, as everyone has said, the first small step as we fight for clean air and reduction of pollution in these communities that haven't had a voice for so long. So thank you everybody for coming out on a Wednesday night, especially after the March for Clean Air earlier today. And thank you to our speakers. And I will send an email tomorrow morning with links and with a recording. And yeah, if anybody has questions that they think of later on, just let me know and I will get those answered from our